Representative Liz Cheney was finally asked something that I've been curious about, which is, while she has protested her own party and their willingness to enable Donald Trump's lies about the 2020 election, she's been part and parcel of a Republican Party that has spread all sorts of lies and talking points about voter fraud that just simply has not existed. And of course, they've done that in an effort to sell these voting suppression bills to the American people. Now, she was asked about that connection during an interview with Axios. Let's hear what she has to say.
You don't see any linkage between Donald Trump saying the election's stolen and then Republicans in all of these state legislatures rushing to put in place these restrictive voter laws?
Well, I think you have to look at the specifics of each one of those efforts. I think if you look at the Georgia laws, for example, there's been a lot that's been said nationally about the Georgia voter laws that turns out not to be true.
But even the Republican Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, said that when this bill started to pick up momentum was when Rudy Giuliani was testifying that the Georgia election was a sham. I don't think anyone doubts that the reason 400 some voting bills have been introduced, 90% by Republicans, supported by the Republican National Committee. I don't think it's a coincidence after the election that this has happened.
Look, I think everybody should want a situation and a system where people who ought to be able to vote and have the right to vote can vote, and people who don't shouldn't.
Yeah, that's not really an answer. And let's be clear, the Republican Party for years, through its well-oiled machine of politicians spouting talking points, which are then covered by right-wing media, have primed the electorate to believe, without any evidence, that widespread voter fraud has been a big problem. So this actually started before Trump, and Trump decided to do what he does best: exploit the opportunity for his own political advancement. And so for her to pretend, first of all, she didn't even answer the question there. We have a second video we'll get to in just a second. But her non-answer there, in my opinion, is telling. Her unwillingness to take responsibility for what she's created, the monster that she's created, says a lot about who she is.
100%. So in fact, the US Attorney scandal happened during the Bush-Cheney years, if you remember. And what was that scandal? That was when the administration was making the US attorneys look into voter fraud cases that weren't there. And the US attorneys would report back, even though they were political appointments and they were Republicans in general, they would report back saying, we looked, there was no voter fraud. And they said, do it again. Or they intimated they would be punished if they didn't find voter fraud. And it was all a politically manufactured event to create a fake scandal about voter fraud so they could limit voting. So that was a giant scandal, and it happened during George W. Bush and Dick Cheney's term. So look, the fraud goes all the way back to 1980. We've shown you that clip a lot on the Young Turks. So Paul Weyrich, who set up a couple of the huge right-wing organizations like ALEC and Heritage Foundation and Moral Majority, he said, we honestly don't want more people voting. We want less people voting in order for Republicans to win. And the Republican Party has been trying to limit voting ever since. And so, and this is not new to American politics overall. Obviously, Jim Crow laws were meant to make sure that black people in the South couldn't vote. And by the way, how did they do that? Things like you have to get an ID. The ID costs money. And even if the ID doesn't cost money in the new days, because they know, hey, that old trick is known to be racist. Well, it's gonna cost a lot of time and effort, right? You might have to take a day off from work to go in and get it, etc. And so we know it's gonna be really hard for you to get it if you live in a city, you're poor, you're a student, all the reasons you wouldn't have a car, right? And those tend to be more Democratic voters. So Liz Cheney knows that her party started this cancer, and her dad was a huge part of starting this cancer in American democracy in the first place. Now she's outraged to find out gambling in this establishment, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden she's like, oh, now Republicans are lying about voter fraud in order to try to steal an election? Well, golly gee, I've never seen it. I'm glad she's came to the party, but she is awfully late.
Also, I think that she's clearly made a political calculation, because I'm not kind enough to Republican lawmakers to believe that she had this moral awakening in regard to Donald Trump. I think that she has decided that the right political calculation is to brand herself as this courageous right winger who's willing to speak truth to power, when again, she's had absolutely no problem with honestly stolen elections in the past, elections that were stolen by, maybe people like her dad who was on the ticket in 2000. In fact, she touches on that. Let's go to the next video.
But what problem are they solving for? Like, there's not like, what are all these states doing?
No, I think, each state is different.
What was the big problem in Georgia that needed to be solved by a new law? What was the big problem in Texas? What was the big problem in Florida? What was these laws are coming all around the states, and like, what are they solving for?
I think you've got to look at each individual state law. But I think what we can all agree on.
You can't divorce them from the context.
Well,
come on.
Yeah, but I think what we can agree on is that what is happening right now is really dangerous.
So she says what's happening right now is really dangerous. And then later she continues to say that when the election in 2000 was contested, that Al Gore did the right thing. Al Gore did the right thing by finally conceding, even though we all know what went down in Florida during that presidential election. So what she's saying is, Trump is unwilling to do the right thing here by conceding, even though Trump rightfully lost the election. He took this battle to court dozens and dozens of times, over 60 times, I believe, and his lawyers failed to provide a single shred of evidence indicating there was widespread voter fraud. The Republican Party has gone out of its way for a very long time now to disenfranchise voters, to suppress voters, and she has to take responsibility for that. The fact that she's not taking responsibility for that, to me, proves that what she's engaging in right now by speaking out against Donald Trump is nothing more than a political calculation to further her own political career. I know that sounds crazy considering she's faced some ramifications as a result of her willingness to speak out against Donald Trump, but I really think that this is the way that she wants to brand herself in the Republican Party.
100%. Look, the Bush and Cheney folks caught feelings too. Because Trump kept attacking Bush over and over again. Sometimes he'd attack Dick Cheney. So a part of it is personal. But the other part is, Anna's absolutely right. Liz Cheney's thinking long term. She's thinking, look, at some point, the Republican Party might turn. And if it turns, they're gonna look for the loudest voice that was opposed to Trump. Well, now that's gonna be me. It's not gonna be Jeff Flake. It's not gonna be Ben Sass. It's not gonna be any of those folks. It's gonna be me. And that's a good calculation. So it's unlikely that the Republican Party will turn against Trump, but if they do, then she's sitting pretty politically. Now, last piece of hypocrisy here. If they counted all the votes in Florida, the entire state of Florida, all the media organizations after the election got together, got all the votes under Chads, over Chads, whatever, all those different things that were hanging Chads, all the different ways of measuring who won. And it turns out Al Gore had won the Electoral College as well as the popular vote, okay? So Bush and Cheney did steal an election. And what she's saying here is not don't steal an election. She's saying don't be a schmuck in how you steal an election.
Right.
We did it right, you're doing it wrong.
Totally.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.